But I also realized that when things are okay, that's kind of a dangerous place to be. Having a coach, I mean, he flipped my whole life upside down. Every area of my life got better. And just having that level of accountability and somebody to ask me such deep and probing questions, but that I knew was going to make me better, or on my own prior to that. And I think a lot of men fall into that trap. You know, we want to try to do everything on our own. And then once we're successful, then, you know, we'll tell everybody about it. So it's great to know what you want. But if you're not committed to it, again, when those obstacles come up, because not if, when they come up, that's going to be when you quit, or when you say, you know what, oh man, this is too hard. Let me go back to my job, or let me go back to this or back to that or whatever. But really, you just have to manage your expectations and realize that the first time you try anything, it's not going to work out the way you want. I can virtually guarantee it. And usually it's going to take multiple times, right? I've never met anybody who's a multimillionaire that doesn't have a coach.
Well, welcome everyone to the Revolutionary Man podcast. I'm the founder of The Awakened Man and your host, Alan DeMonso. Do you know what your life mission is? If you struggle with clearly articulating your mission, that's okay, because right now we're going to at least have a starting point. And if you can define your mission, well, that's great for you. You are one of those few that can actually do that. And in today's episode, we're going to look at life's mission in the terms of our business and personal life with a special guest who lives from this core foundation. Now, before we get into all that, I want to remind you to hit like and subscribe and share on your favorite platform so you can stay updated with our latest content while helping me grow the Awakened Man message. And for that, I just want to say I'm truly grateful. So with that, let's get on with today's episode.
The average man today is sleepwalking through life, many never reaching their true potential, let alone ever crossing the finish line to living a purposeful life. Yet, the hunger still exists, albeit buried amidst his cluttered mind, misguided beliefs, and values that no longer serve him. It's time to align yourself for greatness. It's time to become a revolutionary man. Stay strong, my brother.
As you know, I like to always start off with a couple of questions to help set the stage for today's talk. Do you know what your life mission is? And if you do, how much time do you spend thinking and executing on your mission? You know, having a mission is essential to living and creating a life of passion, purpose, and power. And we do that, we rebound better and quicker from our adversities. And we have the depth of knowledge that is totally unshakable. And it is living life at the highest level is what we're truly after, isn't it? So guiding us on this journey, allow me to introduce my guest today. Ryan Horn is the founder of the Extraordinary Man movement, creator of the Brotherhood of Extraordinary Men Mastermind, and host of the top-rated Extraordinary Man podcast. As the CEO of the Academy of the Extraordinary Men, Ryan's mission is to help men rise up as the powerful leaders they are created to be, so they can lead their businesses, families, and themselves to success and fulfillment. Ryan has helped thousands of men from around the world transform their businesses and life by helping them maximize their potential and become the man that they were created to be. Well, welcome to the show, Ryan. How are things today?
Hey, Alan, thanks for having me on. Things are going well, and I'm excited to dive into this conversation.
Yeah, right on. I'm really looking forward to this. I'm doing some research and getting ready for today. I really liked your message and what you're bringing to the table. So I think we're in for a nice treat with our talk today. So one of the things, Ryan, that we always talk about in my men's work is that we're all on a hero's quest or a hero's journey. So I'd like to start off by having you tell us about your journey and how's that shaped you as the man you are today and to the work that you're doing today.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing I will say is it's definitely been a journey, right? And one of my favorite quotes is that action brings clarity. And so you'll see as I kind of tell my story here that, I mean, there were times I thought I was going this direction and then it ended up changing, and multiple times, but that's kind of the way it goes. So for me, I grew up, kind of my first venture in entrepreneurship was when I was about 10 or 11 years old. So my mom was in charge of the Sunday school, and we went and sold these calendars door to door. I grew up in a really small town, so we knew everybody. And it was the next year, and I was sitting at home. It was summer vacation, and I happened to pick up this fundraising magazine, and I was looking through it, and I was like, oh, these are the calendars we sold before. You sell 30 calendars and you make like $200 profit. I was like, I could do that. So I convinced my mom to order the calendars, and I went around by myself door to door into the grocery store and the bank and sold these calendars. And of course, everybody was like, oh, are you doing this for your Sunday school again? And I was like, no, I'm doing this for me. And it was really funny to see their faces. They're like, oh, but so nobody else in my family is a business owner, entrepreneur. But that's just kind of always the way I've thought. And I tried multiple different things throughout high school and early college that failed miserably, mostly scammy stuff. But went to college, kind of just thought that was the route I should go. I was supposed to go, right? That's what everybody does. And so I was on the track to become a strength and conditioning coach at a college. So I was majoring in exercise science, and I really loved that. I was excited about that. And basically around my junior year or so, I decided I wanted to start my own business instead for multiple different factors. And so I graduated, moved down to the Twin Cities here in Minnesota, Minneapolis and St. Paul, which that alone was an adjustment for me. A 3 million metropolitan area versus my hometown was literally 300 people. And so I tried to start my business, and I learned very quickly that if you don't know how to market and you don't know how to sell, you're not going to make much money. And so about 3 months in, I'd made probably about $200 total. And so I was struggling, and I was drowning in student loan debt. And I was actually sleeping on my aunt's couch at the time, and she lived in a 60 plus condo community. So I actually was technically not allowed to live there. So I'm literally sneaking in and out every morning and evening. And I knew I had to do something to make money. My student loans were about to come due. So I ended up going to this employment agency, and they placed me at this metal factory. And I was working the night shift, 9 p.m. to 9 a.m. for $9 an hour. And so that was a little bit of a reality check. I remember I was sitting in the break room one night, like 2 o'clock in the morning, something like that. And I look up at the clock, and I had this epiphany. And the reason I had the epiphany was because it was my 23rd birthday, and I just realized it. And so I was like, man, how the heck did I get here? Like, this was not the plan, right?
Yeah.
And I thought I was doing everything right. I got good grades and this and that. So, why didn't it work out? And so I sat there, kind of felt sorry for myself for 10, 15 minutes. And, I don't know if you've ever felt like you were made for more, or like, you're letting everybody around you down, but that's how I felt in that moment, and didn't feel very good. Right. But after feeling sorry for myself for a little bit, I actually made a really powerful decision. And what I've realized since then is that you can actually use the pain of those situations to fuel you forward. And so that's exactly what I did. So the decision that I made was that, you know what, I'm going to go restart my business and make it successful or die trying, because I don't want to be sitting here in this break room again next year on my 24th birthday or my 34th birthday or whatever. So that's what I did. So I finished out my shift, quit the metal factory, went and restarted my business. Now, obviously, I knew that I needed to learn how to sell and how to market, and needed to change some habits and things like that. So I dove headfirst into personal development. And one of the first things that I did was this 30-hour Tony Robbins audio program. It's called Ultimate Edge. And I just listened to that thing on repeat and really started to change my mindset, what I believed about myself, my confidence level. I changed a ton of my habits. I started getting up early. I found some accountability partners. And then I also found a mentor that started to teach me how to actually market it and how to sell. And so slowly I started to make some money. And I think about 4 or 5 months later, was able to move out of my aunt's place, and things were going okay. But I also realized that when things are okay, that's kind of a dangerous place to be. Things are not so bad that you're like, oh, I have to do something to change it. But you're far below your potential, right? You know that you're not living up to your potential. And that's kind of the place that I was in for about a year. Things were okay, but I knew I wasn't maximizing my potential. And so I made a couple more powerful decisions, like I said, about a year, maybe a year and a half later. And those decisions, despite the fact that I felt like I didn't have the money to invest in myself, I hired my first coach. And then I also bought a ticket and flew to Miami for a one-day mastermind with one of my mentors that had originally taught me how to sell and how to market. And so those two decisions really, honestly, they changed everything for me. So having a coach, he flipped my whole life upside down. Every area of my life got better. And just having that level of accountability and somebody to ask me such deep and probing questions, but that I knew was going to make me better.
Yeah.
But then also going and flying to Miami and actually meeting my mentor, who he was making multiple millions of dollars at the time. And, spending a time with him one-on-one, it was a room of, I think, 10 people and him and his business partner, who is also very successful. And so for me, that was the first time that I'd actually physically met somebody that successful, because I was trying to do it by my own
Right.
or on my own prior to that. And I think a lot of men fall into that trap. We want to try to do everything on our own. And then once we're successful, then, we'll tell everybody about it. But that really is a recipe for the, the long, hard road. Um, but yeah, so the fitness business that I had, personal training business, was successful. It was doing well. But once I started to get coaching, I got really interested in that. So I started kind of doing some coaching on the side for free, some people that I met from personal development conferences and stuff. And I really liked it. And over a period of time, I decided, hey, you know what? I actually want to be a coach. And so again, first I was just like, I'll coach anybody that wants to get better about anything, right? And then it slowly, as I took action, I was like, you know what? Actually, I want to work with men, and I want to work with men that own businesses. So really, I work with guys that were most of the time in the same position as I was. I was trying to do it on my own and start a business. And so really just help them and coach them to shortcut their success. And so, yeah, that's what I do today. You already mentioned in the opening, I have the Extraordinary Man podcast, and all of that. But yeah, I love what I get to do. And yeah, excited to go in whatever direction you want from here.
Right on, brother. Like, I just love your message. I just love the work. You're still a really young guy, and going out there and taking the idea at such a young age to take I can make $200 selling calendars, and then to build it from there and recognize that at such a young age that life is more, there's more to life than what I'm doing today. And so I really like that message. And the other takeaway I had was, it's so true, isn't it? For men, it's that we just feel that we have this lone wolf syndrome. And one of the things I always say to my guys is that life is a do-it-yourself project. That doesn't mean do it by yourself. It means do it for yourself. You need to find those mentors, and that's what you did. And you did that work, and now you're extremely successful in it. I see that you do a lot of stuff, with men. And so I want to get into really talking a little bit more about the entrepreneur side of your business, and say, where do you find that most entrepreneurs are getting stuck? And what can they do to avoid that, to get themselves unstuck?
That's a great question. So I'm going to actually answer this by using the framework that I actually use to coach my guys. So I call it my 5-step business breakthrough framework, but really it's a framework you can use, anybody can use. You don't have to be a man, and you don't have to own a business to break through in any area of your life. And so basically, after investing lots of time and money into my own personal development and being an entrepreneur full-time now for the past 10 years, I started to realize that there are patterns. There's patterns that lead to success. There's patterns that lead to failure, right? And so about a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, I sat down and put this framework together. And so I'll just kind of go through the 5 steps first, and then I'll go through them in a little bit more detail.
Sure.
So the 5 steps, number 1 is clarity. Number 2 is commitment. Number 3 is coaching. Number 4 is courageous action. And then number 5 is course correction. And so clarity is number 1. I mean, you really have to start with clarity, because if you're not clear on where you're at right now and where you want to go, then you're never going to get there. Right. And, another quote that I love, and I don't remember who told me this, but fuzzy goals don't get hit. Right. Mm-hmm. So you have to be clear on what you want. You're aiming at a fuzzy target, your chances of hitting it are not very good. And so I love to use SMART goals, which is just an acronym that stands for specific, measurable, aligned with your values, realistic, and time-based. And if you do that alone, honestly, and you really actually go into detail with each of your goals, that probably will put you ahead of 95+% of people, because people just don't take the time to do that. They kind of have an idea of what they want in their head, but they don't even write it down on paper. And they definitely don't go to that level of specificity. But then also, I think creating a vision is really important. Mm-hmm. And to me, the difference between vision and goals is 12 months or less. It's much more specific, and you generally have a pretty good plan of how you're actually going to make it happen. A vision to me is 3 years or more into the future. It's big, it excites you, but you probably don't really know how you're actually going to make it happen. And that's okay. but having a compelling vision is going to be the thing that pulls you forward. Because when you have a big vision, you have big goals, I can guarantee you there's going to be obstacles that come up, and a lot of them. And so if you don't have that big vision that's exciting to you, that's pulling you forward, then it's going to be really easy to just be excited for the first couple weeks or couple months and then be like, man, you know what? I actually need to change my goal. I need to lower this or whatever, or just quit, right? Because it's tough, especially if you're in business, you're trying to build something from nothing. It's not easy. There's a reason that 80+% of businesses fail within the first couple of years. But that's number one, clarity. And I believe you have to start there. And I think a lot of people just kind of gloss over that. They're like, oh, I kind of know what I want, right? I want to make $1 million in my business, or I want to do this, or I want to do that. But I would really encourage you to go deep on that. If you're one of those people that has just kind of glossed over that. Step number 2 is commitment. So it's great to know what you want, but if you're not committed to it, again, when those obstacles come up, because not if, when they come up, that's going to be when you quit, or when you say, you know what, oh man, this is too hard. Let me go back to my job, or let me go back to this or back to that or whatever. And so to me, I like to break down commitment into basically 3 parts. So the first one is leverage. So one of the things that I learned from Tony Robbins a long time ago is that there's basically only 2 reasons anybody does anything. It's either to avoid pain, or it's to gain pleasure. If you boil it down at its most simple, most basic. And so you can use this to your advantage if you know this. And so whenever somebody jumps on an initial coaching call with me, I always take them through a series of questions where we utilize both of these. So we look first at hey, you know what? Now we're clear on what you want and your goals and your vision. So a year from now, if you haven't made progress on that, what's your life going to look like? You know, what's the impact of that going to be? And it's not very fun to do that and to dig in, but man, it gives you a tremendous amount of leverage. And so a lot of times people will tell me that was the most valuable part of a coaching call. But we also do the other side, which is much more fun, of pleasure, right? You know, a year from now, 5 years from now, what is life going to look like if you crush these goals and then you go out and set even higher goals, right? And that's fun, but you can use both of those to your advantage. And I will tell you that people will do far more to avoid pain than they will to gain pleasure. So I would not skip out on the pain part, even though it's not fun. Number 2 part of commitment is accountability. To me, accountability is it's the missing bridge between information and application. We all hear tons of great information all the time, but how much of it do we actually apply? Right? Not a lot. And I'm raising my hand too. You know, I hear great stuff all the time, but I don't apply it. So having some type of accountability, professional accountability, is always going to be the best. You know, if you're trying to use your wife or your best friend as an accountability partner, it's better than nothing, but it's only going to take you so far. Right. And then number 3 part of commitment is focus. So what you focus on a daily basis is either going to make you more or less committed to your goals. And so for me, there's kind of 3 main things. And there's lots of things, obviously, that you could focus on that would help you. But to me, it's vision board. So I have mine literally right behind my computer, looking at it right now. Number 2 is something I call a declaration letter. It's basically just your ultimate vision for every area of your life. So I break it down into different areas of my life. And then the third one is my power questions. So this is a series of 6 questions that I ask myself every day. And it just helps me get really clear and crush my day. And if you want later, we can definitely go through those. But those are kind of the 3 main things that I like to focus on. So, you know, it doesn't have to be 2 hours worth of a morning routine every day. It's a couple simple things that are going to help me to move forward. And then part 3 is coaching, or step 3 is coaching. And I kind of break coaching down into active versus passive. So passive to me is like, you know, listening to this podcast or reading a book or something like that, because it can't talk back to you, right? But you're still getting some coaching. You can take what you've learned and implement it. But to me, the highest level of coaching is, you know, one-on-one coaching, or getting in some type of high-level mastermind where you have actual interaction, right? Where somebody can actually talk back to you. They can ask you powerful questions. That's really where you're going to get massive breakthroughs. But the bigger your goal, the bigger your vision, the higher level of coaching you need. So if you tell me your goal is to make $1 million and your plan is to read a book, that's great. I'm sure it's going to help, but it's not going to get you there. I can promise you. And a quote that I really love about coaching from Tom Landry, the famous coach of the Dallas Cowboys for a very long time. It says a coach is someone who tells you what you don't want to hear, who has you see what you don't want to see, so you can be who you have always known you could be. And to me, that's coaching in a nutshell.
Love it.
And yeah, and then step number 4 is courageous action.
Mm.
So, it's great. You're clear, you're committed, you got the coaching, but ultimately this is where the rubber meets the road, right? You've got to take action or nothing's going to happen. And, if you have big goals, you have a big vision, I can guarantee you're going to be required to take courageous action, not just regular action at some point in time, and most likely a lot of points in time and consistently. But this is where I see a lot of people get stuck. And honestly, if you feel like that's you, you're like, oh man, yeah, I know there's this thing I should be doing, but I just can't get myself to do it. Or, I only do it when it's convenient. And you're never going to hit your goals if you do it when it's convenient, right? So how do you actually push through and do that? Well, you got to go back to steps 1 through 3. If you're in that place and you feel like you're struggling, I can virtually guarantee you after coaching so many guys that something's missing. Either you're not clear enough on what you want, or you don't have a big enough vision, you don't have a high enough level of commitment, or you don't have a high enough level of coaching. So honestly, if that's you right now, I would encourage you, go back and look at those first 3 steps.
Yeah.
But by the way, courage doesn't mean that you're not scared. It means you're scared and you do it anyway.
That's right.
Yeah. And then the final step number 5 is course correction. And this one can actually be the hardest step of all, because if you feel like you've done steps 1 through 4, you're like, okay, I was clear, I'm committed, I got the coaching, I'm taking the courageous action, but I'm still not getting the result I want, right? I tried it, didn't work. That can be really frustrating. That's where I see a lot of people that want to quit, they want to give up. And a lot of people do give up at that point. But really, you just have to manage your expectations and realize that the first time you try anything, it's not going to work out the way you want. I can virtually guarantee it. And usually it's going to take multiple times, right? It took Thomas Edison 10,000 tries to invent the light bulb. And I'm glad he didn't give up, because I may be sitting here burning a candle otherwise. But I love to use the analogy of a baby learning to walk, because when a baby's trying to learn to walk, they don't just stand up and start walking, right? They stand up and they fall down. They stand up and they fall down. And then they stand up and maybe they take a half a step and they fall down. But it's over and over and over again. And so, I mean, imagine if your child was trying to walk and you gave them like 10 tries and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they're not walking. They tried 10 times. Like, you know what? I'm just going to have them stop. They're just not going to be a walker, right? Now, of course not. You're going to say, my kid is going to keep trying until they walk, right? And so that is the key right there to success. That is the formula. So if you just apply that to your own life, to your business, whatever it is you're going after, it's not a matter of if you're going to be successful. It's just a matter of when. So that is my 5-step business breakthrough framework. And hopefully that answered your question of where people tend to get stuck.
Yeah, absolutely. And he gave a great framework. I really liked it. And each of those steps are so profound, and it all starts with clarity. And that's so important. I think that's what really has led me to doing the work that I'm doing today, and likely for yourself as well, right? When you finally get clear on what's important to you, number one, and why, and what your vision is for yourself in the future, then it's much easier to stay committed, because it's when those obstacles, and I like that you have a section in there about dealing with obstacles, because let's face it, obstacles are going to come up, and sometimes those obstacles are us, right? I'm the obstacle, and it's because we're not clear, and because we've had this learned fear as we've gotten older and older, and especially when I find the men that I work with are a little bit older. I'm in my 50s, so a little bit older. Lots of life stuff has happened for us, and now we're trying to recenter ourselves, and so we may not be as willing to try some things as we are when we were in our 20s. And so it's so important that we have some sort of framework. And that's the other thing I really liked about it, is that how you really broke up the accountability with the commitment and the focus. It really helps anyone. And like you said, it's not just for men and women, it could be anyone, couple doing business, any type of activity you're in. This framework makes so much sense. And so I think that's great. And I love the the course correction piece and how you're talking about managing expectations. And I think that's another thing, right? And in the other part, I go back to what you were saying earlier on in your story, in your original hero's journey is, you were able to recognize that maybe that goal wasn't necessarily the first goal I wrote wasn't necessarily what works out, right? And as you start to do your work, that gets refined, right? And so I think some of us, we have this perfectionist idea in our minds, and that, it was supposed to be this way, but we're closing ourselves off, right, to having us explore something different.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I'll raise my hand on that too. I definitely have a perfectionist tendency. And I think it's really easy because we want to try to figure it all out before we take the first step. But the problem is you're not going to figure it out until you take the first step. So it can be, really hard for people. It can be really frustrating because they're like, I need to figure out the next 50 steps, then I'm going to do this. But you just got to take the first step in front of you. And then, like I said before, that's why I love that quote, action brings clarity, because it's so true. If you don't feel clear, that's okay. Just start taking some action and you're going to get some clarity.
Absolutely. And the other point you bring up about courage is right, courage is not the absence of fear. It's about facing the fear. And I always like, and I'm a big fan of Jordan Peterson. And I always like how he refers to that part of our life, or the shadow part, the darker stuff, is that dragon. It's all the things we don't want to deal with in our life, is that dragon. And are we going to go and deal with him in his lair, or are we going to wait and let it overcome and consume us? And so I love the analogy of going over and recognizing that I'm still fearful, but I have courage and I take courageous action. And maybe for some folks, that's doing a cold call. Maybe it's just even doing a podcast. And I know I was kind of there the year and a bit ago when I started the podcast, and you can tell by the frequency, but this year I made a commitment that I was all in, and a minimum one a week. And I've been on that. Now we're into April now, just about getting into May. And, when it's so different, right? When you're clear and you make a commitment, that, life starts to happen for you, and we don't have to figure it all out. We just take some action, brother.
Yeah, absolutely.
So tell me a little bit about now you obviously you've invested some time in yourself, and you talked about a couple of things, but why is it so important that you feel that you needed to invest in yourself, and why do you think other people should consider that, at least? Because maybe some guys, we're still in that lone wolf, and maybe I don't need to, reach out to somebody. But tell me a little bit more about this part of who you are.
Yeah, well, if that's you, and I definitely had a phase where that was me too, I would say, first of all, take a look at your results, and are you happy with them? If you are, great, maybe you're crushing it by yourself, but the vast majority of people are not. And even if you're doing okay, you're just going to be able to go to the next level. We're not designed to do things on our own. No man is an island. And so I think it can be hard for people. I remember, like I mentioned in my story, when I hired my first coach, and, I booked that one-day mastermind and bought the flights and stuff. I had to put it all on credit cards. It was definitely a leap of faith. But after a year of kind of plateauing and being in the same place, I was like, you know what? I've tried to do it on my own, and hey, I had a little bit of success, right? But I know that I need something else if I'm going to go to the next level. And so I think once you experience it, whether it's hiring a coach or joining a mastermind, or even just going to a live event for the first time, I remember all of those things. For me, it was so eye-opening, because I was like, man, this is such a shortcut. You go to a live event and you build your network, and you meet other people and find out, oh, they struggle with the same things as me. Wow, I thought I was the only one, right? And, like I said, nobody from my family is a business owner, entrepreneur. I knew nobody else that was an entrepreneur, business owner when I moved down to the Twin Cities. So I was very isolated. And, even if you have great friends, if they're employees, they're not going to understand what it's like. So going to live events, I would say, was a huge aha for me as well, which, again, I put that off for far longer than I wish I would have, but it's a game changer. Meeting other people and networking. I've met some of my best friends through that. So I actually, we won't have time to go into this story, but I met my wife through a personal development event. So tons of benefits, but I would say if you're skeptical, just, you don't have to go buy a $25,000 coaching program tomorrow. Maybe you start with just a book, or if you're listening to this podcast, then you've already started to invest in yourself. Maybe not monetarily, but this is an investment of your time.
Mhm.
So I would say, just start taking small steps and start actually applying it and putting into action. And you're going to see that, okay, wow, this is actually working for me. But yeah, it's very important. And also I would say, if you want to maximize your potential, the training never stops, right? It's not like I'm like, oh, okay, now I hit this level of success, I'm just going to put it on cruise control and whatever. No, I'm part of a really high level mastermind. My wife and I still go to a lot of events, personal development events, and we have multiple coaches. And what I've found, I've interviewed a lot of really successful people on my podcast as well. The more successful people are, the more they invest in themselves, the more coaches they have, the more, events they go to and masterminds they're a part of, not the opposite. I've never met anybody who's a multimillionaire that doesn't have a coach and isn't very involved in personal development. So
Yeah, no kidding, my friend. Absolutely. And you think about it, and some of the greatest people, all the greatest people in the world have all had coaches at some level, at some form, right? Jordan didn't become Jordan without having Phil Jackson helping him.
exactly.
All of us need a coach. And I think when we get out of the idea that the lone wolf and start by investing time and energy first, and if that's what you need to do, that's what you need to do. And I think none of us are saying here today that you need to go and quit your job, your 6-figure job, to go and start a new business. Now, if you have the financial resources to do that, great. But if you don't, at least start with something. It costs you a microphone, and a computer, and you can start your own podcast, if that's what you need to do. And it's so important that guys understand that you don't have to have everything, doesn't have to be perfect. You just have to start somewhere. So I think that's awesome. Now, I got a sense that when you were going through your 5-step breakthrough framework process, that some of that might be a bit of a routine, maybe a morning routine or a ritual you go through. Tell us a little bit about how you get your day started, and how do you ensure that every day you're going to be crushing it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've actually never thought about my morning routine in context to the 5 steps, but I will kind of go over what typical morning for me looks like. So I'll be the first to tell you I'm far from perfect. I mess up my routine all the time, or don't do stuff or whatever. And I think it's easy for people listening to people on podcasts sometimes to think, oh man, he's perfect, I can't do that, and whatever. So that's not the case at all. First of all, let me say that. But when I am on point and when I crush my days, I get up early, usually 5:30. I like to go work out first thing in the morning. So at the moment, I have a toe injury, so I'm not playing basketball, but I usually play basketball twice a week, pick up basketball. And then I like to work out 3 or 4 times a week. So just about every day. But man, the days that I work out versus the days I don't work out, my focus and my productivity is so much lower when I don't work out, and so much higher when I do work out. So that's kind of part one. The other couple of things that are really important in my morning routine, because some days I do more, some days I do less, but the power questions that I mentioned before. So those 6 questions, and I'll just mention a couple of them for people.
Sure.
So the first question is, what are 3 things I'm grateful for? So cultivating an attitude of gratitude, I think, is so important, because it's not normal. It's like in a garden, weeds grow automatically. But if you actually want to grow something with some fruit, then it takes some time and some effort. It's the same with our mindset. We naturally just go to negative. So if you want to have a positive mindset, you actually got to put some work in. So forcing myself to come up with at least 3 things that I'm grateful for every day, that alone will really massively change things if you consistently do that. But that's the first question. Another question for me is, how can I make Brittany feel loved today? So Brittany is my wife's name. And I want to make sure I'm focusing and doing something towards my marriage every single day. And usually it's a small thing, but it's just that It's the daily habits. And then the last question, question number 6 is, what are my top 3 outcomes for the day? So I will list out top 3 things that are most important, because the thing is, we all have 100 things that we want to get done that day. We all have a huge to-do list, right? But the reality is that we're never going to get it all done. And so a lot of people finish the day, even if they got a lot done, feeling defeated, feeling, they're beating themselves up and like, oh my gosh, I didn't do this and I didn't do this and I didn't do that. So this really is very helpful, because you're identifying the top 3 things that are going to move the needle forward, because it's also easy to get caught up doing things that don't really matter that much. If you're starting a business and you're spending 4 hours a day working on your logo, then you got the wrong priorities, right? But yeah, I think that's really important. And I'll just mention one other one too, because I think for men especially, this one's really important, is what are 3 things that you achieved from the previous day? So again, it's really easy for us to just think about the things that we didn't do. So this forces you, and I've found for a lot of guys that I coach, when they start doing this is a really hard question for them to answer, because they only want to look at, oh, well, I didn't achieve anything yesterday. I didn't achieve, because they didn't achieve anything big. Right. So when you can start breaking things down and writing down small things, even, because I guarantee you achieved at least 3 things yesterday, even if you have to write down that getting out of bed was one of them. But one thing that I know is that success builds off of success. So when you start to change your mindset and the way that you're thinking about things, and you're seeing the achievements that you are doing, you're focusing on the outcomes, you're cultivating that attitude of gratitude, it really starts to change your mindset. And that's incredibly valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. Love those questions. Those are definitely power questions that all of us should be asking ourselves in the morning. That's just great. So one of the other things that we talk a lot in my work anyways is about, living a life of destiny and how we get to there. And we get there by the decisions. So tell me why you believe that decisions are so important in determining what our destiny is.
Yeah. So something else that I learned from Tony Robbins is that your decisions equal your destiny. Right. And I think, just going back to my story that I told earlier, if you look at me sitting in the metal factory 2:00 in the morning, I made a decision. And the reason I'm on this podcast talking to you right now, I can trace back to that decision a long ways back. Right. And there's a lot of decisions in between there. But had I not made that decision, I don't know, maybe I'd still be working at the metal factory. But yeah, decisions are really powerful. And I think people struggle with decision making, and the reality is that not making a decision is also actually a decision. So it's a skill that I think leaders are very good at, making decisions and making them quickly. And the thing is, the majority of the time, if you make a decision and it ends up not being the right decision, then you can just change course and make the right decision. But if you sit in indecision, and it's easy to get in your head about things like this, right? And then you just loop it over and over and over again, and you never actually make a decision, then nothing is actually going to change. So it all starts with the decision. I believe decisions are really, really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like how you explain that about getting it out of our head, because we do tend to be, as men, to be very cerebral, right? We just think about it, and we don't really, because we're not good necessarily at expressing what we're thinking very often, nor very well. And so it's so important to help drive that clarity part as well, right? Really the first step of your process. So listen, of everything that we talked about today, what is the one thing that you would want our listeners to take away or remember about our conversation?
The one thing that pops into my mind when you say that is that failure is not final, right? So we talked about course correction, because it's so easy to, you take action, you try something, it doesn't work out, and then your identity becomes that you failed or that you're a failure. And, you were talking earlier about older men, especially, maybe they've tried some things in the past and it didn't work out. So then they don't even want to try anymore. Right. So just to remember and to realize that failure is not final. And honestly, I don't even like to use the word failure. So to me, I call it a learning experience, because that's what it is. And so the only way to truly fail is to quit.
Yeah. I hear you, brother. I hear you. Well, listen, Ryan, thank you so much for spending time with me today. And becoming an extraordinary man, requires us to know our mission, just as you've been demonstrating yourself and talking about it today. And by taking purposeful action, we can revolutionize who we are as men. So I want to thank you, brother, for all that you're doing. And what would be the best way for our guests to reach out and get a hold of you and participate in one of your programs?
Absolutely. So the best way is to go to my website, which is coachryanhorn.com. And so there's links to everything I do there, a link to my podcast, the Extraordinary Man Podcast. I have a free Facebook group that you can join if you found this valuable. And something else I would love to do for your listeners. So if you're listening to this, if you're a man, if you own a business, or you're thinking about starting one, you can actually apply for a free coaching call with me. It's a free business breakthrough coaching call. Basically, I'll walk you through the first couple steps of my 5-step framework. And if you're one of the first 5 people, just mention this podcast when you're filling out the application, and I will make sure you get a free coaching call.
Well, that's outstanding. Thank you so much, Ryan. So what I'll do is I'll make sure all that information's in the show notes, so everyone will get a chance to get access to it. Once again, thank you so much, Ryan, for spending time with me today. It was outstanding discussion.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on.
Right on, brother.
Thank you for listening to the Revolutionary Man Podcast. Are you ready to own your destiny? To become more the man you are destined to be? Join the Brotherhood that is The Awakened Man at theawakenedman.net and start forging a new destiny today.